Companies like ours must speak up as allies to the Black Lives Matter movement.
You didn't post the right black square at the right time of the year, and now your bosses are screaming at you and people are targeting you.
Corporations aren't simply tweeting their support for the riots, they're paying for them, too. Recently, the CEO of Cisco announced that his company is donating $5 million to the Black Lives Matter Foundation. Airbnb is donating $500,000, so is Dropbox.
In addition to socialism, defunding the police, open borders, another staple of the radical Democratic Party is their love of mixing politics with sports.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell calling out what he calls the outrage industrial complex, as others say maybe they should boycott companies like Delta and Coke for bowing to woke online mobs over Georgia's voting law.
SEC Chairman Gary Gensler unveiling a list of what some are calling woke reforms that the commission is planning to vote on.
Defense contractor Raytheon is now forcing its staff to, quote, identify their privilege and give those with marginalized identities the floor during meetings.
Big business has figured out that they can actually make money by critiquing themselves, right? And at first it looks like masochism, but actually if you look more closely, it is a way that these guys deter regulatory scrutiny. My name is Vivek Ramaswamy, and I'm a traitor to my class. I know how the elite business world works because I've seen it firsthand, from Wall Street to Silicon Valley, from elite academia to big pharma. I got my first job out of college, right before the 2008 financial crisis, working right here in New York City. And in my new book, Woke Inc., Inside Corporate America's Social Justice Scam, I reveal the truth about the invisible new force at work in the highest ranks of corporate America. Here's how it works. You pretend like you care about something other than profit and power, precisely to gain more of each. All magicians master the art of distraction. Flashing lights, blowing smoke, walking beautiful women on stage. Well, today's business titans do it by promoting progressive social values. And their tactics are far more dangerous for America than those of the older robber barons because their do-good smokescreen expands not just their power over the market, but over every other aspect of our lives. As a young 21st century capitalist myself, the thing I was supposed to do was shut up and play along. Wear hipster clothes, applaud diversity and inclusion, muse about the racially disparate impact of climate change after flying on a private jet to a fancy ski town. It's not a bad life. But the most important part of the trick was to stay mum about it. Now I'm violating the code. I am pulling back the curtain to show you what's really going on in corporate boardrooms across America. I'm a Harvard-trained scientist, a Yale-trained lawyer, a former hedge fund partner, the founder of a multi-billion-dollar company, and a first-generation American from a small town in Ohio, and I am done playing the game. I am sick and tired of corporate America's game of pretending to care about justice in order to make more money. It is wreaking havoc on American democracy. It demands that a small group of investors and CEOs determine what's good for society rather than our democracy at large. And that new trend isn't just ruining companies. It is racializing our politics. It is dividing our country to a breaking point. America's top companies, universities, and nonprofits have turned their back on America. This is the story of how it happened, why it happened, and what we can do to stop it.
If there's ever a person with the ruling class bio, it's Vivek Ramaswamy. Went to Harvard, went to Yale Law School, he made a pile in biotech, and you'd think from there he would be like everybody else. But something happened within Vivek Ramaswamy that made him question the system that produced him. And he decided, well, there's a huge problem with the system, actually. It's gone completely off the rails. And he started talking about it. He got attacked for saying it. And then he decided to write a book about it. And not just a quickie book. He doesn't need the money. A book that he thought through. And that it's actually really smart and interesting. It's called Woke Inc., Inside Corporate America's Social Justice Scam. He minces no words. We're happy to have him on the set with us today. Vivek, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us what wokeness is.
Yeah, so there's the complicated definition and there's the simple definition.
Yes.
The complicated definition borrows from Marxist thought, which says that the social universe is governed by these invisible power structures that determine how you and I relate to one another. And Marxist thought said that those power structures were defined by economic relationships, by economic power, by how much money we did or didn't have, by how much capital we controlled. Agree or not, I happen to not identify as Marxist. There's something coherent about that logic, right?
There is.
Because anybody can be disempowered if they ultimately don't control capital in an economy that relies on the flow of capital. Okay. That was the Marxist worldview.
Yes, and there's some truth in that.
Yeah, I think we can debate it. I think we can discuss it.
But it's a much more fluid understanding because you can go from being a capital holder to being someone who is economically powerless. Exactly. And you can go in the other direction.
And you could be in any country or you could be any skin color, but you could be disempowered because you don't have money. And money buys you the ability to buy the things that you want.
It's a universalist message in the sense.
It kind of is universalist.
It applies to everybody, and it's based on immutable principles that have to do with your behavior rather than your genetics.
100% right. Nailed it. Now, wokeism borrows from the theory of these invisible power structures, but it says, Marxists, you didn't quite get that right. So when people say wokeness is Marxism, I think they're off by half.
I agree.
Wokeism says something different. No, the real axes of disempowerment are genetically inherited. It is your race and your gender and your sexual orientation, and that the real problem wasn't economic injustice or poverty. No, it was racism and misogyny and bigotry. And the thing that I learned about over the course of reflecting on this from my book is that actually presented the opportunity of a generation for Wall Street right around the 2008 financial crisis. So you'll remember I told you I was working in an investment firm in New York that I joined in 2007. I lived the 2008 financial crisis. The firm that I worked for shrunk massively on the back of the 2008 financial crisis. I lived in New York City during the Occupy Wall Street movements. I understood that shaped my view of capitalism, to be really honest with you. I love capitalism, but I also grew wary of capitalism when it got commingled with politics, which is what we saw in the post-2008 era. And the interesting thing about wokeism is it was born right around that same time. And if you're a Wall Street bank, Occupy Wall Street, that's a pretty tough pill to swallow. It has its origins in Marxism, right? That's pretty tough. But this new woke stuff is actually pretty easy. You applaud diversity and inclusion, put some token minorities on your boards, muse about the racially disparate impact of climate change or whatever it is, and you're good to go. And so Goldman Sachs, as they did last year, can issue from the mountaintops of Davos an edict that says they will not take a company public in the United States if its board is insufficiently diverse, where Goldman, of course, defines what counts as diverse. They don't mean ideological diversity. I'll tell you that. But they were happy to dance to this new woke tune, to lend their money, their legitimacy to this new woke movement, but they didn't do it for free. They effectively had an ask to the new left. This is the mutually deal with the devil in both directions, where the new left, the new Democratic Party, has to look the other way when it comes to leaving their corporate power intact. And so what you have is a bunch of people in my generation, a bunch of woke millennials, get together with a bunch of big banks. Together they birth woke capitalism, and then they put Occupy Wall Street up for adoption. And that's really when wokeness met capitalism. That's when it went from a fringe theory in the academy to becoming supercharged with the potency of capitalism. And when it mixed with capitalism, that's when wokeness became unstoppable.
Talk about an axis of evil.
Totally.
I mean, this might be the ugliest, most dangerous alliance in American history. I can't think of anything more destructive than what you just described.
Yeah, and the funny thing is it's an arranged marriage, but not of love. It is more like mutual prostitution because each side in this marriage secretly has contempt for the other. They have secret contempt for the other. And any marriage in which each side secretly disdains the other isn't going to end well. But right now it's working because each side is getting something out of it.
Can we skip to the part where they eat each other and we enjoy it as we watch?
Well, there's a part that comes in between then, which is where this bilateral arranged marriage actually turns into what I call a threesome, which is the Communist Party of China getting in on the act, right? So they see what's going on here with this arranged marriage, and they say, okay, this is actually an opportunity. And the opportunity is this. If we can get those companies to criticize the United States in the United States, but stay silent about our actual human rights abuses here in China, we can do the thing that we could have never done with our nuclear arsenal. And that is to undermine the moral standing of the United States on the global stage. So they got in on this act. There's a Chinese word for wokeness, as you well know, baizuo, which literally refers to woke white people, and they used to laugh at us. But it's not just a joke. They are now using that as a geopolitical tool to say, oh, Nike and Disney and the NBA and Marriott, you want to criticize the United States? Have at it. If you criticize China, we're going to build a great Chinese wall and you can't enter our market. But if you criticize the United States, we're going to roll out the red carpet to you. And by the way, if you're Airbnb, we're going to roll out the red carpet if and only if you give us the consumer data that you gathered from your progressive consumers who love it when you post a black square on Instagram, a condition for Airbnb's entry to China. That's a little known secret that the Wall Street Journal reported on last year. But that's how this game is played.
Ah, you're upsetting me.
Your blood will boil. Yeah. It makes my blood boil.
I know all this. I don't think I've ever heard it as clearly explained as you just did.
This is personal to me. In 1993, when I was in second grade, I heard Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech for the first time. That was the speech where he said, I hope my 4 children grow up in a country where they are judged not on the color of their skin, but on the content of their character. That dream stuck with me. It meant something to me because it was the dream that allowed my dad to come to this country from India over 40 years ago and build a career as an engineer at the GE plant in Evendale, Ohio, despite having a thick Indian accent. It was the dream that allowed me to go in a single generation from being the kid of immigrants who came to this country with almost no money to becoming the founder of a major biotech company. But I stepped down as CEO of that company this year to work on a different kind of disease, not a biological disease, but a cultural one that threatened to kill Martin Luther King's dream, the very dream that allowed me to achieve everything I ever have in my life. The consequences could be existential for America. Woke culture has created a new culture of fear in our country. Fear of losing your job, fear of failing a class at school, fear of becoming a pariah in your own community. And now almost every day, somebody new is sacrificed at the altar of identity politics for saying the wrong thing. And that new culture of fear has completely eroded our culture of free speech in this country. And even worse, it has started to destroy the American dream itself. I'm not here to just tell you about the problem. I'm going to tell you what we need to do to fix it. And the first step is to start talking openly again. So let's do that when we come back and talk to Lara Trump about what I call the woke industrial complex. Wokeness is a new secular religion in America whose belief system centers on the idea that your identity is based on your race, your gender, and your sexual orientation, full stop. It says that America is a systemically racist country, that if you're black, you're inherently disadvantaged, that if you're white, you're inherently privileged, no matter what your upbringing was. And now, according to Ibram Kendi, one of the high priests of the new woke religion, the only way to remedy past discrimination is present discrimination. The only way to remedy present discrimination is future discrimination, even though generations of civil rights leaders taught us to do the exact opposite. Now here's the tricky part. When wokeness met capitalism and got supercharged with the muscle of corporate power, that's when it became unstoppable. That's when everyday Americans were forced to choose between keeping their jobs and speaking their minds, between the American dream and the First Amendment. Faced with that choice, everyday Americans are now bending the knee. Liberals accept it because they love woke causes. Conservatives look the other way because their inner conscience tells them that the free market can do no wrong. And both sides are blinded to the rise of a new monster that is far more nefarious and far more powerful than anything we have seen in modern history, the woke industrial complex. I sat down with Lara Trump to talk about what this new marriage means for America. How did this go from becoming a fringe theory in corporate America to becoming the dominant philosophy of corporate America, Lara?
I think that these people who inherently run these companies, they feel so much exterior pressure, and you hear the idea that, well, if you haven't said anything, then you are complicit, then you must agree with the other side. So they feel that they need to come out and opine on things like the Georgia voting law that clearly the Major League Baseball folks had no idea what they were talking about, because it actually makes our voting system much safer and much more dependable, and that should be something positive for all people. But all of these institutions have decided that now is the time to speak up and speak out. And it's a little frightening because it doesn't do anything positive. But I think that at the end of it, it's really about, well, let me do something before you attack me and call me a racist. Let me do something before you attack me and say that I'm homophobic or whatever it is. And none of these people really believes that they are these things. Nobody thinks that they're racist, but they got to jump the gun. They got to get ahead of it. And unfortunately, it is contributing, I think, to really the destabilization of our culture and ultimately the downfall of our culture.
I talk about this a little bit in my book, Laura, and I think that I have a couple of theories on it. One is I think some companies are doing it because it allows them to make another buck. They blow woke smoke to be able to do what they always want to do, which is to make another dollar. Win another government contract if you're Lockheed Martin or Raytheon. There's no woke way to make a ballistic missile that kills thousands of people, but that's exactly why they blow more woke smoke. So that's kind of the scammy kind of woke capitalism. That's really different than a number of other companies whose CEOs actually are doing it authentically.
I think you're exactly right. I mean, the reality is most people are afraid to speak up and speak the truth and tell you what they really think because they're afraid they're going to get canceled. They're afraid they're going to lose their job. And that's a really scary place to be in America because our First Amendment rights guarantee freedom of speech.
So the other side will say that actually this is the free market working because these are private companies making their own decisions about what values they do and don't adopt. In fact, they say that for Silicon Valley today is that these are private companies, these are technology behemoths that decide for themselves what they want to host on their platforms and what they don't. Now, I personally think that actually reveals the true farce of the way the system is working today, because what we now see is that the party in power is effectively instructing companies about what they can and can't put online. We effectively expect that the new woke left works with the Democratic Party to look the other way when it comes to leaving their monopoly power intact. So in a certain sense, this is the product of a grand bargain. What do you think about that?
I think you're spot on. And they have looked the other way. They have completely ignored the ultimate power that these social media companies specifically have, the way they have the ability to sway elections, which we know for sure they did. Think back to the Hunter Biden laptop story last year, right? This was a legitimate story.
It's an important story for the American people to hear.
Very. That was censored by almost all social media outlets out there because they had, I'm sure, made this bargain, made a deal with the Democrat Party, and they said, as long as you do what we want you to do, then we will look the other way. We will allow you to maintain this power that you have. It's incredibly dangerous. It is incredibly dangerous to the future of our country as a republic. It is incredibly dangerous. I think worldwide, the power that these companies have, the bargain that they've made, it's really like a deal with the devil. And the people, sadly, that are going to be hurt most by it are the American people.
Both sides are blinded to the rise of this new, uniquely 21st century monster, and it's unclear what exactly we can do to stop it.
Well, it's a little scary to think that we now have to think of that. How do you stop this? What happens next? How do we move forward in a way that is positive for America and positive for the world? And really, I kind of feel like we have two directions. One direction is that people wake up and they say, wait a minute, this is not America. This is not the country that we used to know. This is not a free market economy anymore. These people have basically overthrown that and have this massive power source.
Working with, by the way, political power.
Right.
Working with the government in power
and
today.
Are making decisions for us. We are no longer deciding things for ourselves, are giving us information as they want us to have it, not, information that we can critically, think about and digest. Or sadly, it goes the other way. And perhaps this continues until it really dissolves the United States of America and Western culture as we know it. And I think that's the ultimate goal here. The end game for the people pushing this woke ideology is the end to Western culture. They have never liked it. They have wanted it to end for a long time, and then they get to rebuild it in their perfect image. And I don't think that that's what any of us want deep down. So we need to take a long, hard look at ourselves as Americans and say, when are we going to say enough is enough? When are we going to have the CEOs that stand up and say, I'm not going to make any statements politically, I'm just going to be neutral? We need more of that out there, and I think it would go to further a cause that would be positive for America.
What would you say to someone who's on the left that says, okay, maybe I used to be skeptical of companies, but as long as they're doing the right thing, then I'm in favor of it? What would be your response to that?
Well, that they hide under this guise of justice and equality and all of these key words that they use to say that they are doing the right thing. If you actually break down what these companies have done, where the money goes, who it is that they're helping and who it is that they're hurting, ultimately, what you get to is that they are about profit. They are about themselves. They are ultimately doing nothing to better anyone's situation. And especially in the United States of America, this is a free country. We are a free market economy, and that should be the deciding factor on things. And I think that the more we encourage people to take pride in themselves and work hard and be proud of what they do, that's a good way forward. The idea that we're going to guarantee an outcome is crazy, and we should never subscribe to that.
Now you've heard the story of how wokeness got married to capitalism. Well, I have some bad news for you. A new guest just showed up on the scene and turned this unholy alliance into a three-party affair: the Communist Party of China. We'll talk about that next with former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Welcome back to Woke Inc., inside corporate America's social justice scam. I'm Vivek Ramaswamy, your host and the author of the new book that rips back the curtain on the new corporatist agenda. I want to warn you about a new player in the game of woke capitalism: the Communist Party of China. I've been an exchange student at Chinese universities. I've done business in China, and I can tell you that they understand this game far more deeply than any of us do. There's even a new Chinese word for wokeness: baizuo. And they're literally using wokeness as a geopolitical tool to erode our standing on the global stage. Secretary Pompeo, thank you for joining me today. So I think the big mistake in U.S. policy towards China over the last 30 years is that we thought that our money was going to get them to be more like us. And instead what we've seen is that their money has gotten us to be more like them. We sent Big Macs and Happy Meals thinking that was going to spread democracy, and instead they sent back Nike sneakers and Disney movies filled with their values like Trojan horses, undermining us from within. What do you think?
So I think that's largely true. I would add to that, they took our money and it fueled their economy as well. So they used our money as a resource to come steal our property and then recycled that by dumping products here, by knocking off products, stealing intellectual property connected to those jobs and the wealth that they had taken, and then recirculate it back in the United States, creating this great coupling that they depend on, right? They use that as a tool. Your point about this is exactly right. Whether it's some of our companies like Nike and Disney, these are companies that refuse to stand up for American values. Although they will tell you here at home they care deeply about all of these things, that every human being be treated equally. And then they go to a place like China, and when the Chinese Communist Party tells them to say X or not say Y, they comply with nary a whimper.
Why have we been so ill-equipped from a public policy perspective to actually do something about it?
The consensus establishment view on foreign policy is really hard to break. And this isn't Democrat or Republican. This is just the consensus view, frankly, since 1972, since Kissinger went to China. And then, frankly, after the accession of China to the WTO in the early 2000s, the United States policy has been sell them more stuff and they'll behave in a way that's more consistent, or at the very least, their bad behavior will be confined to China. But what we clearly came to see, and what the Trump administration acknowledged for the first time, is what happens in Beijing impacts lives all across the United States of America.
I'd love to hear from you what you think policymakers could have done better, or even more importantly, could do better in the future to make sure they're not able to use corporations as Trojan horses to undermine us from within.
Well, we're always going to have some risk of this. We operate in an open society. So some of this is just something that we accept as part of a republic, as part of our democracy. So fair enough. But there are a set of requirements we can place on these companies. The genocide in particular is an easy one. We can make it unlawful. We can make it expensive. We're going to have to put strictures on American companies that say there are certain things that are just so far outside the boundary that we're not going to permit this to happen, and we should do that. Commerce Department started to do it in the Trump administration. We began what I think of as the technical decoupling, right? The very specific national security decoupling that we need to do.
And if it were up to you, would you favor advancing such policies?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. And we started to do that. We started to blacklist products that were connected to American national security's apparatus.
Calling it out is half the equation, and putting sunlight on a situation can help a little bit. But that's just the beginning. Public policy has to play a role, too.
My biggest regret, frankly, is that we didn't get to finish this task from the Trump administration. Of all the things that we didn't quite get to.
That was the unfinished business.
If you look at the unfinished business, it was charting the right approach to confronting the Chinese Communist Party, not only commercially, as we've been speaking to, but challenging them ideologically, challenging them militarily, being prepared to confront them every place they are. My other worry is that they're not just these commercial enterprises, but it's here at home. The Chinese Communist Party is operating its United Front Department inside the United States of America. They are attending our meetings, they're talking to our governors, they're going to city council meetings. These are serious matters that the American people need to be awakened to, so that we can begin to think about the policies that will appropriately address how to make sure that we do right by our Chinese citizens who are here in America and the United States, but confront communism in the way that Ronald Reagan did it with the Soviet Union, but with the added complexity of a deep commercial set of interconnectedness that the Chinese Communist Party knows binds us and makes it more difficult for us to do what we were able to successfully do to push back against the Soviet Union.
So one of the themes I think we need to talk about, building right on where you left off there, is China's understanding of the kinks in the armor in the American system. And one of the kinks in the armor that I talk a lot about on the show, in the book, is the woke movement and what it does to racial identity politics in the United States. And I think there's now, as I said before, a Chinese word for wokeness, baitsuo. They understand this game far more deeply than any of us do. And I think that they are now using wokeism as a geopolitical tool to advance their own agenda.
There's nothing like the threat if we get it wrong here at home. If we aren't focused on the things that matter, the value sets that our founders left to us, that understanding of our republic, then the Chinese Communist Party will have the space. The last thing that's worth saying about this, though, is we know there's kinks in the Chinese system, too. And we should never pretend that they are 10 feet tall.
So say more about that.
They want us to believe that America is in decline. Because they believe it. I actually think they believe America.
I think they actually do believe it.
I think they do, too. I don't believe it. But left to its own devices, it's a risk. That's why we need American leaders. That's why we need President Biden standing up and saying, no, America is not in decline. We're gonna go win this thing. Reagan talked about we win, they lose. This is a we win, they lose moment with the Chinese Communist Party. And we have to go seize it and focus all of our energies, commercial energies, diplomatic energies, the energy of making sure our military structure and strategy is correct in every space, whether that is missile systems, space systems, cyber systems, all AI, technology, all of the systems, your business, right? The medical community, the technology that surrounds biotech. We have to make sure and harness the American brain power, the American know-how, and the American energy to go crush them. We can. I'm convinced of it. But they operate in a command and control structure. One of the things that's glorious about America is we don't have that. If we get this right, if we get the policy set correct, the Chinese Communist Party itself will crumble from within, just as the Soviet Communist Party crumbled and the East German Communist Party crumbled from within. We can achieve this, but what we can't do is just continue to let them walk all over us.
So what should we do about it? That might be the single most important political question of our time. We'll start talking about the solution with House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy when we come back. We've talked about the problem. Now, let's talk about the solutions. In 1980, one of my heroes, Ronald Reagan, correctly identified that the greatest threat to individual liberty and prosperity in this country was big government. He did what he needed to do in his era. But today, that's only half the story. For example, conventional wisdom says that technology companies are free to decide what does and doesn't show up on their websites because they're private companies. And the First Amendment protects only against government censorship. That's true, but it misses the essence of what's actually happening today. The ruling party in the United States has co-opted Silicon Valley to do through the back door what the government cannot directly accomplish under the Constitution, through a combination of threats and inducements. That's the new trick for how big government does its work today. Crony capitalism 1.0 was about private companies bribing the government for favors in return. But crony capitalism 2.0 works in reverse. Big government bribes big business to do its bidding instead. So how do we fix the problem? It starts with new policies for the modern era.
I talked to House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy about how to accomplish this in Congress.
A policy that, I think you know this, I think should be at the top of the conservative agenda right now, which is to say that if you can't discriminate against somebody on the basis of race or sex or religion or national origin or sexual orientation, then you should not be able to discriminate against that person on account of their political perspectives either. Why isn't that at the top of our agenda right now?
We know it's something we're debating right now because I agree with you. But this is the problem. If you look at latest polling and you poll liberals in America, 60% of them said they have no fear of what they can say. But 50% of them believe you can fire somebody if they voted for President Trump.
America is not supposed to be a country that forces you between putting food on the dinner table and expressing your views. This is a country where you get to have both of those things. Political discrimination is a far bigger problem than racial discrimination in our country right now, and yet we're not using policy to address it at all. Now, you and I both know there's going to be a libertarian objection to this, to say that there shouldn't be one more constraint on what a private business can and can't do. I used to think this way myself. What would you say in response to that?
I think the world has changed. You take the tradition of the past and you apply it to a changing future. We know that we're not a perfect nation, but we strive to be a more perfect nation. We knew we had to make great strides when it comes to civil rights and others. But it's almost like we went back to the Dark Ages. You would not think that political beliefs would have divided us, but now it's divided us so far. This is the problem. It's not government using it, it's those in government that are fostering ability. Why is the Democratic Party more socialist today than it was before? They're using that funding to fund their philosophy and grow it.
They might say that, oh, well, Congress, the Republicans in Congress were obstructionist. But that's life in a two-party system. It's part of what's built in is the brakes to spending the public's money, right?
Have a debate on the policy and the ideas and let the public decide what is best for them. Would the public want to have this inflation? Would they want to have gas prices this high? They haven't since the time before. We want to have a border that's not protected. Would they want to have wokeism? That should be a free debate.
Yes.
And let people decide at the end of the day what they want the future to be. And most of those problems lie in not legislation being passed, but administrative action. And now they're taking the administration to punish you, but if you're not giving to government, they're taking it and funding their own liberal operations to foster further.
That is so good. Have the public debate. That doesn't mean that your side or the other side is going to win in a given case, but have the debate. And what we're seeing today is the use of economic force in the private sector supplanting public debate at all, both amongst our citizens and here in Congress. And I love what you say.
They first intimidate you that you can't speak up. You lose your job if it's not the same view. Then they go and take networks that you can't even put the ideas up, so you can't gather information. Then they take business and fund them and put fears of regulation that you take certain actions and what you fund your capital. Because where capital is king, economies grow.
That's right. That's right.
If you don't have capital, you can't grow.
But say in public what you say in private. Because when you put a black square on your Instagram account and cheer in favor of Black Lives Matter, let's also say that you actually supplicate to your overlords in China rather than saying that you don't promote American values, what you actually say in private. Let's reveal that for what it is. And the American system tends to work pretty well when the people know exactly what to expect. But when they get duped, that's when we get into the quagmire we're in today.
Look, I have no problem if they say they're there to promote our values. They're there to run their business. But what are your values? And if your values are a certain value, how are they valued in China?
Exactly.
What's better, America or China? So be honest with what it is.
Be honest.
If it's the value of the dollar, you just want to have a market share, but you'll bow down to whatever they say, Well, then China Communist Party is no different than the American government because they're influencing the same way. And that's the foundation of what we should be fearful. I fundamentally believe the best days are still in front of us. We have to take the traditions of the past but apply them to a changing future. The philosophy of a smaller government and more efficient, of focusing on the individual. That is a philosophy that works. America is more than a country, we're an idea. You still rise up from Cuba to Hong Kong to Tiananmen Square. You crave the freedom of speech. I never thought there would be a moment we'd have to fight so hard here. But just as Winston Churchill always said, you can always count on Americans to do what's right after they exhausted every other option.
Amen. Amen. What we really need today in America is a cultural cure. We'll talk about that with my friend Brian Kilmeade after the break. Earlier this year, I met a high school senior who said that we should tear down a statue of Thomas Jefferson because he was a slaveholder. In response, I asked him a different question. Instead of tearing down Jefferson's statue, why don't we build one for John Adams instead? He was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, he was the second president of the United States, and he was an ardent abolitionist. Let's build a statue for him instead of just tearing the other ones down. As it turned out, that was something we could both agree on. Today, I think we could all learn a thing or two from both John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. They were close friends before becoming sworn enemies at the height of their political careers, only to become good friends again before they both died on the same day, July 4th, 1826, on America's 50th birthday. You can't make that stuff up. That's American history. And that's what we need to be teaching our kids in schools, instead of teaching them who's privileged and who's oppressed in the classroom. I joined Brian Kilmeade to talk more about how we fill our moral vacuum in America with something more meaningful than wokeness. How do we do that?
Let's not deny that we were a country that had slavery and had a civil war to end it, and had a Reconstruction that didn't grip and didn't take root, and a 1960s to bring us the rest of the way. How are we pretending that in 2021 we haven't made progress from 1860 or 1776 on race relations? That's just farcical. That to me makes you throw up your hands and say, you guys are crazy. I don't know where that came from, but it's so out there I can't even engage it.
And that's what we're doing. Then it distances us. We're done having the conversation when we have people who aren't actually willing to even engage with our country's actual history. Why are we teaching our kids all of the ways we've fallen short of our ideals, making them forget what the ideals were in the first place?
So I think fundamentally we have to reconfigure how we do history, which we now call social studies. And what people misconstrue is by learning American history, they say, well, you're just jamming propaganda down kids' throats like North Korean Kim Jong-un. Not really. Tell the story simply for the kids. First, second, let George Washington chop down the cherry tree. Make them out to be the positive attributes. Get them to know them. And then come 11th grade, come 12th grade, come college. Show the other side of them, the other dimension to them. It humanizes them. And that doesn't take them down. That makes them more relatable. Not saying Jefferson didn't have slaves. Not saying he didn't have affairs. But look at what he did by the time he was 30. Look at the courage that he showed throughout his entire life. But you could still like Jefferson, because to me, so we went from studying history to judging history.
What should we be teaching them to fill that moral void that wokeism and critical race theory fill?
Because you're forcing everybody every day to say, oh, you're white, you have an advantage. You're Indian, or you're Asian, you always go to the Ivy League schools. You're African American, that means that the world is stacked against you. But if you just say, I'm from New York, and for a New Yorker to go to USC, that's a big deal, as opposed to an African American that ends up in Harvard is a big deal. For some reason, we were melting the pot, and all of a sudden we turned off the Bunsen burner, and we end up with all these different nationalities with no interest or ability to mix. And there's people at top saying white people are bad, black people are oppressed, Asians are smarter than everybody else, and they're telling you this subtly or directly. And please tell me the end game. Do you want to divide the country?
And the beautiful thing,
to me, that's the way to divide the country. What you want to do,
we're actively doing it right now.
You're an American. First generation, second generation, third generation. Welcome Sergio, he's from Italy, he's the first time he's here. He's the third generation, you know what it's like, Let's learn about your culture, but it's American first.
The thing about America though, Brian, and you put your finger on this right there, America's an idea. It's not even a place, it's a vision of what a place can be. And the issue with having an idea as a country is the way you describe America actually affects the way America really works. So if you describe America as a racist country to the next generation, that might be actually the thing that turns America into being a racist country, even when it wasn't before. And the thing I'm just wondering about to conservatives, though, that frustrates me is that as we complain about what we don't want taught, how can we do a better job of really outlining what we do want taught, the values that we do want passed on to the next generation? Because I think that's just where the conversation really needs to go.
I wasn't brainwashed that America was perfect ever. I went to public schools all the way around, went to a private university where I was a student athlete. It wasn't, LIU was good, solid, in between, Midland. There's not one political science or history course that I took that said, congratulations, you're in the perfect place. But what they did is taught the curriculum in a way to understand, not perfect, but look at how we kept trying to get better.
America's brilliance was that it was founded on the idea that perfection is impossible. That's what our system of checks and balances is all about. No man, however high or however low, no president, however noble, could ever be held to the standard of perfection. The entire Constitution, if you actually take a deeper lens to what it's all about, is about the imperfect nature of human nature itself. It's woven into the American fabric.
And people who, if you challenge critical race theory, they say, well, you just don't want to admit that America had this racial past and America had a civil war and didn't really solve any problems. African Americans were free, but they weren't totally free and there was still segregation. True.
All true.
Nobody's saying that. And guess what? We studied that. We are not running from our past. We are just not condemning the present and not defining people by their race.
And there's that culture of fear that comes out of it, right, Brian? There's this idea that if you're tarred with the scarlet R, the label of being a racist, there's really no greater damnation in modern America than to be tarred with that scarlet R. And so to me, that is what's driving this choice between either pledging allegiance to this new religion or bending the knee. And I think that too many Americans are bending the knee out of that culture of fear. What do you think?
I can't believe in my adult life, we're talking more about race, not less. You know, when you used to study race in America, you used to hear about men, black and white bathrooms and water fountains and where you should sit in the back of the bus. And in 2021, that should be something you study in history class or watch on a documentary, or when John Lewis passes away, you flash back to what he went through and you respect the past. But we are acting as if it happened yesterday, that Robert E. Lee is coming to keep the South strong today, and that he's taking on Ulysses S. Grant tomorrow. That's just not the case. And for some reason, there's this force in America right now that wants our past to be front and center in a negative way and wants payback. Wants payback for something we have no control over then, nor do we have any control over now. And all it's doing is creating resentment in 21 that hasn't existed maybe since 1861.
We'll be right back with my final thoughts about how we defend the American dream from the woke agenda. What does it even mean to be an American in the year 2021? Our lack of an answer to that question is the black hole at the center of our nation's soul. And when you have a vacuum that runs that deep, bad things start to fill the void. That's what makes wokeness so appealing. It is opium for the American soul. I'm a millennial, and I can tell you that my generation is hungry for a cause. We are hungry for a sense of purpose. We are hungry for identity. But we've forgotten all of the ways in which America itself can be that identity. Because America was the first and greatest country to be defined on a set of ideals that brought together an otherwise divided polyglot group of people together. And the most important of those ideals was the dream that I told you about at the very beginning, the American dream. The idea that no matter who you are or where your parents came from, you can achieve anything you ever want in this country with your own hard work, your own commitment, and your own dedication. That is the American dream. But over the last decade, something scary happened. We woke up. And once you wake up from a dream, you forget what it was all about. That's the real danger of wokeness. But we still have time to get this right. If the 2010s were about celebrating our diversity, then let the 2020s be about celebrating what still binds us together as one people, the American dream. E pluribus unum, from many, one. These are the values that won the American Revolution. These are the values that reunited us after the Civil War. These are the values that won us World War I and World War II and the Cold War. These are the values that still give hope to the free world. And if we embrace these common values rather than fractious group identity, then nobody in the world, not a nation, not a corporation, not a virus can defeat us. That is what true American exceptionalism is all about, and that is what we will need to revive in order to defeat this cultural epidemic. I look forward to telling you more about it in my book, Woke Inc., which comes out this week. I plan to donate my personal net profits from the book to advancing this American agenda. Thank you for watching, and good night from New York.